Okay. Hello, everyone, and this video is going to be the 10 books that I recommend at the moment. I mean, they're not necessarily like the 10 books that I would say are my favorite of all time or whatever, although a lot of them are. So some of them will not be very surprising because we've already talked about some of these writers and I've already mentioned them. But Flannery O'Connor, you can get her complete stories, the complete stories of Flannery O'Connor. She is more or less the patron saint of the Iowa Writers Workshop. So, one of the most famous writers who went there, and she's obviously on the list that I put together of literary writers. The Comforts of Home, I think I said I consider to be a perfect short story. Perfect, of course. Like, what does that even mean, right? I mean, I would say that that short story, every sentence is on point, like and it does exactly what it wanted to do, and it's very rereadable. There's no wasted movement, and it crafts a huge effect for a short story. So, and it's also pretty experimental. I mean, it does some daring things, um, and she's just a really good writer to read. Um, if you want to remind yourself what it means to write a story with a lot of reality and with very intense characters. Here we have Jesus' Son by Dennis Johnson, another writer who went to the workshop actually. And that book for a long time was the book that I would recommend to everybody who asked me, to recommend the book to them. Um, it's slim as you can. I don't know if you saw, but it's a slim book. It's a very poetic book. It's short stories, but it's written in an extremely um, poetic and experimental form, and the stories themselves are very short. I mean, you could read this book in a day and learn a lot about writing. Then we have another book that at one point was probably my favorite, Invisible Cities. It's a, I mean, talk about experimental. This book breaks like all of the rules that I gave you, or I haven't given it to you yet, but I will upload tomorrow. That list of mistakes to avoid when you begin writing. This book, um, yeah, it's just unique. There's no other book like it. It's basically a conversation between Marco Polo and Kublai Khan, and I mean that's the frame, but the bulk of the book is a description of fantastic cities, um, and that's basically there's no plot to it. It's a traveler. It's Marco Polo who's traveling and describing these different cities that he encounters. Then I have to mention Hamlet. I know you think maybe like, oh, he's just saying that. No, I mean, I read Hamlet maybe 6 months ago. I reread it, and I was blown away. I was like, no wonder Shakespeare is considered to be a classic writer. I mean, the first three acts in particular of Hamlet. I mean, just you can tell how much fun Shakespeare had setting up the situation. The last two acts are not quite as good. I mean, in my opinion, and I'm not the first person to say that. I mean, I encountered a critic who I read said the same thing. And whenever you do read Shakespeare, I recommend reading the Norton Critical Edition. Yeah, Norton Critical Edition. Because they have a lot of essays in the back. I mean, Hamlet is not that thick. Like it's pretty slim. It's just a play. But there's a lot of commentary here, a lot of essays, and it really helps to, especially in the beginning, it helps to read, essays on writers. In fact, in some ways, the book that really got me to open my mind about literature was a book of essays on Franz Kafka because I had read one story by Franz Kafka for class. I mean, The Metamorphosis, actually, and then we also read A Hunger Artist. And then I went to the library. This was like in 11th grade. I went to the library and I saw this book, Franz Kafka, Modern Critical Views, edited and introduced by Harold Bloom. Um, and I opened it up and I was reading it and I was like, I mean, I felt like I had missed the whole point of Franz Kafka because these critics who were analyzing his work in this book, I mean, they saw so much that I had missed, and I realized how powerful literature could be. Um, so, anyway, I guess that's a bonus. My current favorite book is Zeno's Conscience by Italo Svevo, who was friends with James Joyce, actually. There's a lot of history there. I mean, there's a lot of history in all of these books that I can't go into in a 10-minute video, but this book is just so funny. Probably the most unreliable narrator that you will ever read. Probably the wittiest narrator, or at least one of the wittiest that you will read. Um, and yeah, I mean, just give it a chance. You know, get to like chapter 2, and I'm pretty sure. I mean, I mean, not that it takes a while to build up or anything. I think it builds up relatively quickly, but you know, I'm pretty sure by the time you get to chapter 2, you'll be hooked. So, um, speaking of James Joyce, I guess, you know, I will say Ulysses. Like, I know a lot of people maybe, uh, you know, will bash Ulysses in your lifetime. You know, even great writers might bash it every now and then. Um, it's a sort of, I don't know, I guess it's sort of a controversial book, and as you can see, it takes quite a bit of dedication to read it. It took me like 3.5 months to read it. No, 2 summers ago was when I first read it, and to be honest, though, I loved it. I mean, it was a great book. I don't, I like to see writers who experiment with language. I like to see poetic writers. I mean, um, and it's hard to find a more poetic and playful writer linguistically than James Joyce. And it's also, I think, impossible to find a writer who had more versatility than James Joyce. I mean, if you look at the beginning stuff like Dubliners, so, you know, compact, and you know, so you know, such efficient realism, you know, and then you go all the way to the end of his career with Finnegan's Wake, probably the most linguistic and experimental book that has been written to this point in the history of literature. I mean, I can't think of any more experimental book than that. Is it necessarily successful? A lot of people would say no. It's not exactly an enjoyable reading experience, but he really did it all. So the collected stories of Amy Hempel. She's a contemporary writer, actually. Um, I think her career is kind of winding down. Actually, this isn't even all of her stories because this was collected like years ago, and then she came out with another collection. So, but she was probably my second favorite writer after Franz Kafka when I was younger. You know, beautiful prose sentences, very compact, just like surprising sentences. Um, she's sort of considered a minimalist, I guess, along with people like Raymond Carver and Ernest Hemingway. And I guess, you know, Franz Kafka, the complete stories. I was really happy to see that how many of you had already encountered Franz Kafka. Um, he's a writer who, I mean, he's so strange. Like, he really, he does a lot of things that you would not tell, you know, young writers to do. Like, he has a lot of daring for a writer. He really did not follow a lot of conventions. And most people who try to do the stuff that he did fail. Like 99% of the people will not be able to do it. I mean, you'll need a lot of experience and probably just sort of semi-natural writing ability to be able to do the stuff that he did. And especially nowadays, I mean, if you read Franz Kafka and then you try to imitate him, you know, don't do it because don't imitate, you know. Or at least try not to. It's going to be unavoidable. I mean, when I started writing, I was imitating left and right. Like, you do it without necessarily being conscious of it half of the time. But on the other hand, you know, imitation is not bad as long as you're aware that it's what you're doing. Like, the first 2 or 3 really good stories I wrote were kind of Kafka-esque. back when I was 17 or 18. Um, and then after that, of course, I read more writers, and my style sort of, you know, developed after that. And then lastly, we're going to include The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Um, Freud called it one of the biggest achievements of humanity. I guess those are pretty big words. So it's really an incredible book. It has a bit of a long backstory to begin, but you can't go wrong with reading Dostoevsky. He's a thrilling writer. You'll learn a lot about plot and about character from him, and he's just exciting. Other than, I think Virginia Woolf said that other than Shakespeare, there's no more exciting reading than Dostoevsky. And Shakespeare is exciting. I mean, you just have to kind of, get used to, interpreting the language a little bit. But I really recommend reading it in the original. Don't read any of those, like, I guess, what would you call them? Like Shakespeare in modern language or something, because you'll lose all the art of it. So there's no point in doing that. I mean, part of the point of reading language, or part of the point of reading Shakespeare, is enjoying the language. Yeah, I guess what other there's other books. I feel like I have a certain momentum now. I don't want to just stop, but I mean, of course, I recommend reading, Don Quixote. It's a classic. It's considered the first modern Western novel, and I mean, if you read it, you'll realize like how many of the things that are considered to be postmodern and metafictional really were already being done back then by Cervantes. So I guess I'll stop there. That's a pretty good list. I wanted to find 60 stories by Donald Barthelme, whom I've mentioned a couple of times, but I couldn't find it. So there you go. I don't know. That's about it. You should read Madame Bovary as well. I can't find it right now. Yeah, I guess we'll end it there. If I think of any other videos to put together, which I'm sure I might, because I've been thinking quite a bit about what kind of resources to give you all. But yeah, if I think of another video series, I'll post it tomorrow. I think I'm done for the night. As you can tell, it's dark outside because it takes a while for the video to upload to YouTube. So otherwise, I would do them a little bit quicker. But yeah, read 1984 as well. I reread it recently, or I heard it on Audible, because I'll like read a book and then I'll hear it on Audible again, because I have some long commutes to my other job. Sometimes I have another job, so yeah, I sometimes have long commutes and it's nice to listen to things. But yeah, I heard it again recently and I was like, damn, this is intense. It was more intense than I remembered. Yeah. Oh, Machado de Assis is a writer that I discovered recently, and he is also incredible. He's a Brazilian writer. The Posthumous Memoirs of Brás Cubas. Really funny, witty book. Yeah. Well, there you go. I guess that was more than 10. So I'll stop there because otherwise I won't be able to stop. So I'm gonna click the stop button with my finger because my mind will just keep going. So.